Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Best Is Yet to Come podcast, where we talk to ordinary people who do extraordinary things. As always, we're coming to you live from the center of the universe, world headquarters here in Centerdale, Rhode Island. We have a very special show today. We have a gentleman joining us who is a lifelong Rhode Islander. He can trace his roots back 13 generations, which is pretty amazing. He served his country as a Marine for over 3 decades. He has a business background in building. He has an educational background in economics. And he is going to, hopefully, in his case, be the next congressman to represent us in this Congressional District 1 here in Rhode Island. And that gentleman is a man by the name of Gerry Leonard. Gerry, welcome. And thanks for coming today. Appreciate having you.
Shane, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Gerry, first of all, I appreciate you coming here, and what we talk about on the Best Is Yet to Come is ordinary people who do extraordinary things. And I've done a little bit of kind of history on you, and you are certainly a guy who's done some extraordinary things. And obviously, the most recent now is you had this idea to run for Congress, which we'll get into in a little while.
All right.
But the first thing I want to do is I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself. Who is Gerry Leonard to Rhode Island, to the country? Who are you? Where did you come from? How did this all start?
I would say I'm a native Rhode Islander and absolutely love the state of Rhode Island. Always have, much like all of us that have grown up here. I have a deep pride in my family history and tracing those roots back 13 generations. Interesting story is my ancestral home, my family's ancestral home. We don't own it anymore. Yeah. Couldn't afford to keep it during the 1920s and 30s. Right. But
tough time for our country back then.
It was burnt down 3 times. Once during the King Philip's War, and then one time afterwards, which might have been a natural fire. And the house that exists today is the 3rd house on the same foundation, which is it's kind of neat. And I also trace my ancestral roots. Nathaniel Green and I have a common ancestor.
Oh wow, that's pretty interesting.
So and he was one of my revolutionary heroes.
Wow, that's amazing. So I got to say, as a person who I consider myself a fan of history, and I love everything about it, and I always continually try to learn, because that's the old saying of those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. But I don't think I can recall ever meeting someone who can trace their history back in Rhode Island. I'm sure I have, maybe without knowing it. Maybe it's not a conversation, but I find that fascinating. So that's an amazing, lineage to come from. So tell me a little bit about that. When you trace your lineage back, how far back does it go? And do you know those people? Do you know of those people, their names, and what they did?
Yeah. So my first ancestor on my mother's side was James Reynolds. He was a Quaker. Came here for religious freedom. Apparently there were 3 brothers that came here at the same time. He settled in Rhode Island, one settled in Pennsylvania, and one settled down in North Carolina. I don't know what happened with those tracks, so I kind of like to make up what happened with those tracks. And so I would say the ones that settled in North Carolina started a tobacco company called Reynolds Tobacco. The one that settled in Pennsylvania, I suspect there was a general killed in the Battle of Gettysburg named General Reynolds. I'm assuming that comes from that line. But my line was they were carpenters, builders, and farmers. And so there's a number of old homes in the village of Wickford that if you walk the streets, you'll see some of my ancestors on it. So they built some of downtown Wickford that exists today. So that's on my mother's side. On my father's side, trace our roots back to Roger Mowry, who's came down to Rhode Island with Roger Williams.
Oh, wow. So that's at the beginning. That's right there.
And so my understanding is that he started the first tavern in the city of Providence that on Sundays served as a church.
Oh wow!
So you could spend your night there on Saturday and wake up Sunday morning and go to church. So so that's very proud of that family history and my family's history involvement in Rhode Island.
That's pretty amazing. So all right. So you grew up in the southern part of the state, right? I believe you, if I'm correct, You were born in Newport, grew up North Kingston area. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, born in Newport. I'm not going to tell you the year. And yeah, grew up my formative years North Kingstown. Went to North Kingstown High School. Was more focused on sports than school at the time. Went off to college, played a little bit of basketball, and then realized if I was going to do anything with my life, I better start studying. And ended up doing pretty well in college.
Oh, excellent. So tell me a little bit about. So you grew up in North Kingston. What was that like for you? What was that like? What was your experience in North Kingstown?
It's a middle class family. Both parents are teachers. Sister's a teacher. Grandparents were teachers. So I come from a family of educators. I was a little bit of the black sheep when I went in the Marine Corps.
I was going to say, and you became the Marine.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing people, a good leader is a teacher. And the skills that my parents raised me with were incredibly helpful in the Marine Corps. And probably the most important thing they imbued in me, that the most important thing we do in life is serve others. And whether you're teaching or whether you're leading Marines, it's the same thing. You're serving other people.
Absolutely. That's great. So before you became a Marine, though, tell me a little bit about. So you went and got an education, right? You went to college upstate New York.
I did.
Okay, and you got a degree in economics. Is that correct?
I did.
All right. So what was that? What intrigued you, or what motivated you to get involved in higher learning in that type of field?
Well, to be frank, my freshman year, I struggled a little bit because I wasn't really focused on the books, but the economics classes seemed to come easy, and I was getting good grades in them. I said, well, maybe this is a natural fit for me.
There you go.
Always loved history too, so I ended up minoring in poli-sci and history, majoring in economics. I think I made my parents proud. I ended up in honors in both history and economics. And I had the privilege in my senior year of high school to do an internship. Got picked up to do an internship with the Congressional Budget Office, which, as you know, is the nonpartisan or bipartisan think tank for the U.S. Congress. Excellent. Down in Washington, D.C. So that was a great experience.
So not just a jarhead, we got some education behind that too, some formal stuff. So that's pretty impressive. Good. So you get the education, and you graduate college, and you spent some time, is it true, on Wall Street?
I did. I graduated with this economics degree, and I'm not really sure what I was supposed to do with that economics degree other than I got good grades in it. And all my fraternity brothers were heading down to Wall Street. It was 1987. That's when the market crashed.
That's it.
Great year to show up.
All right.
So I decided,
they made a movie about that.
I decided to reward myself for working my tail off in college by taking the summer off. I think I did some landscaping that summer, and I was a bouncer down at the Coast Guard house in Narragansett. And
shout out to the Coast Guard.
Yeah, right. and Judge Caprio. And so I did that. Took the summer off, and I went down to New York in September, late September.
So just before it happened.
Just before it happened, and that was an ugly day. Trying to find a job as a broker. But the other funny thing is, I did not really know the difference between a trader, a broker, an investment banker, an analyst. I had no idea what that's not my bag. My parents are teachers.
Right.
So it was a learning curve. So I ended up, my first job, I worked for Chase Manhattan Bank as an analyst, operations analyst, which is not the sexy side of working for a bank.
Sure.
The financial analyst.
Yeah.
The operations analyst is the guy that tries to save money. The other one tries to make money.
Right.
I was on the saving the money side. But it was a good experience, just wasn't for me. Hopped into sales after that, thought I wanted to be around people more than sitting in a cubicle, be outside. And
what type of sales?
To be perfectly honest,
what type of sales were you doing?
I sold phone systems.
Back then, the 80s, that was a big deal.
It was a big deal. So we sold to companies up to 150 people. So small, mid-sized businesses that might have 150 stations.
So that's interesting. I'm going to tell you a little history about this building and this particular office.
Oh, really?
We're in. Yeah. So when this podcast, when we end, I'll walk you around and show you. I have a phone system in this building. And it's from the 80s, all right? And it's funny because your story coincides a little bit with some stuff that went on in this building. And if you look, actually, so you being a Wall Street guy, you might appreciate this. I'm going to show you something. Do you recognize one of those? That's a date stamp machine for trading.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Yeah. So the gentleman who at the time during that time frame that owned this building, this particular office, that's the business that he was in. And I joke every now and then I called him the Wolf of Smith Street. And, but what was unique is when I came in here and I'm looking at this building, there were all these phones. I mean, everywhere. I had the 4 phones on this desk, and there's a phone in the restroom. There's a phone in the other restroom. They were everywhere. And there's a phone system in here that has like 1,000 lines. It's incredible, to the point where there were so many phone lines in here that in the basement of this building was a hub for back then was like 9X or Bell Atlantic or whatever company it was. So it's pretty crazy that it's funny that ironic that you were in that business of selling phones. You could have been selling to this guy.
I was schlepping phones, and it was hard. So you'd go up to, and I had from Fifth Avenue all the way to the Hudson River.
So you're in the heart of the city.
60th Street till about 54th Street, and the Time Company was there, and I remember walking into their office, and it was very hard to get past the gate guard. And they weren't always but sometimes you could slip by. And one day I slipped by, and this is when I was contemplating doing something else. And I slipped by and I got in the office of the CEO. And it was just he and I asked to talk to him for a couple of minutes. And I sat down and I didn't talk to him about phone systems. I asked him how he got to be where he was and what his background was. And he told me he was a Marine officer, and that's how he started his life. And that kind of stuck in the back of my head that maybe the service might be a thing. I wasn't thinking the Marine Corps at the time, but the way he carried himself, the way he presented himself was impressive to me. So I don't know, maybe it was fortuitous.
Well, it's funny though. Doesn't every story start with something like that, where you have something that has an impact on you, right? Whether it's another person or some situation. But you meet someone, and I've always felt that way too. You see somebody and you find some type of interest or some type of affinity towards that person and what they do, and then you find out and you ask those questions, right? I always say I feel intelligent people always look at something that they identify as success, and then they figure out, okay, well, how do you get there? That's something that I would like to do. How do you get there, right? And so that's pretty cool that story that you're selling phones and all of a sudden you run into a guy and now you want to be a Marine.
Yeah, it was interesting.
So how long after that meeting did it take for you to join the Marine Corps?
So I probably about 6 months, and the final thing that happened is it was, and I'll never forget, it was Christmas Eve, 1988, and I came home from New York, and every Christmas Eve we'd go down to friends of my parents' house, and we're down there having Christmas Eve dinner. And my dad's friend was a retired Marine colonel, and he taught in East Greenwich High School. And he goes, how you liking it? I'm like, man, not real enthusiastic. Get up in the morning to pound my way on a subway and don't really enjoy what I'm doing. He goes, come on in my den. So I go into his den. He shuts the door, and it looks a lot like your space here. And he's got Marine Corps memorabilia on the wall. And he starts telling me about the Marine Corps. And he tells me the story of a bunch of stories, but the one that really resonated with me is he told me the story of the night his unit got caught in an ambush, and how his company commander did some heroic stuff that night. And then he said the next thing he remembered was carrying his company commander off the Huey helicopter and putting him into the MASH unit. And he said, Gerry, I looked around and the doctors were working on everybody else. They were doing triage, fixing everybody else, and they were ignoring my company commander. So I went and grabbed the doctor, shook him, and said, fix my company commander. And the doctor looked at this now retired colonel, then a lieutenant, and looked at me and goes, son, he's dead. And as he's telling me this story, his eyes are welling up. With just,
you can imagine.
But with passion. And I'm like, my God, I don't have this type of passion in my life. And so that's when he said, you need to join the Marine Corps. The other side note to that company commander that was killed that night in the ambush, saving those people, all those Marines' lives, was the first Marine officer awarded the Medal of Honor in the Vietnam War.
Wow.
So yeah, it was pretty heroic stuff.
And that was a tough. I mean, that's still been a tough situation throughout history, and unfortunately, I want to maybe at that point we can transition a little bit and bring politics in. You have probably a unique perspective on what's going on in terms of the geopolitical arena, as well as obviously our national politics here. And it seems as though politicians, I feel that those that have served this country, and in some cases I really wish that maybe I had the opportunity, I would have taken the opportunity to do that as I think about it as I gotten older. But I feel that those that have done that, like yourself, have a much different, but I'll use the term better, I guess, understanding of government because of the way things work, and then also having the ability to be on the front lines. But something as controversial over the years as Vietnam has been, and again, that was a little before my time, but I kind of understand it a little bit. But that was such a difficult thing for I had some family members that were in that war, and specifically a Marine, and that's always been a tough thing. And the fact that government kind of uses sometimes, I feel like, the military in a way, right? That I don't know. What are your thoughts now? So as you're running for Congress, there's some things going on. There's some interesting things. What is your take about your military experience or people's military experience being involved in government? How do you find that as an advantage?
One, I like to say the people we send to Washington, D.C. need to understand that the decisions they make and the votes they take have consequences on American families. And I saw that in the battlefield, Iraq and Afghanistan. So those decisions should never be taken lightly. Right. We should not be doing a wag the dog type of thing with our military forces. We ought to have clear objectives with our military forces. We need to be realistic in what you can accomplish with military power. You're not gonna fix the world, but there's definitely a need, and we need to be judicious about how we use our military resources and take those votes in Washington, D.C. and how we're going to employ them, and that's incredibly important. And there's some statistics I saw recently. I saw a bar graph of how many folks have served in uniform now sit in Congress, and you look at that graph from after World War II, which a lot more of our people were in uniform, but that number's a very high percentage of Congress, and it's just been in a steady decline since then. Right now, I want to say 17% of those folks that are sitting in the United States Congress, Senate, and the House actually wore the uniform.
Which is kind of, when you think about it, right? It's a little astonishing for the fact that when this nation was founded. So I think history, or the statistic on it, according to what I've read, is about 3% of the colonists actually fought in war against the Brits, which is amazing to think how they won. And we don't have to go too much into the revolutionary history, but the point is so many people that formed this nation had ties, military ties. And I'm a huge fan of, obviously, our first president, George Washington. I strongly believe in a lot of the things that I've read that he said. As far as, originally, again, being the first president, he didn't believe so much about parties. He wasn't a party guy. He built, he felt we need to be united, and that parties divided us, and that it needs to be about the American, goals, not, say, a Democrat or Republican goal. And I think that when you start to understand those people and the mindset of those people, and just how, in today's society, in my opinion, they do not get the credit that they so deserve in terms of, drafting first the Declaration, then going through the process to actually get to the Constitution that we're so fortunate to have today. But most of those people that had influence on that had some type of involvement in protecting, whether it's, be a militia or at that point now the formed military. But, you bring up a good point as far as getting into more of a modern history with World War II. My grandparents were part of that generation. My grandfather served in the Army. He was in Germany in World War II, and I always said that to me is the greatest generation in modern history, because it was just a unique place. But they had a lot of pride for our country, and I think they really do. I think we've lost some of that, where people it bothers me when people see the American flag and they don't maybe have the same feeling that I do, or that type of feeling that you'd hope we all would have as we unite as Americans. And so now we fast forward and you look at our political landscape, and to your point, such a low percentage of people who have actually served are in there. And when you look around, it's a lot of attorneys. It's a lot of lobbyist type people. It's a lot of people who have different backgrounds. And I always say with government, it seems easy to make certain decisions to the point that you made when you're not the one, or it's not your family, or it's not your money, or it's not it doesn't have this direct effect. It's easy to say, I want to spend money, that's not ours. Or easy to make a decision, we're going to send people off to go to war, that's not maybe our family or not ourselves. And, I think it's important that we really consider that. And someone like yourself, I really do, I want to say I appreciate the fact that you've taken this opportunity and to, once again, after doing it for 30 years in the Marine Corps, but want to serve your country again. I think it's important. And I think people that have already done it in your capacity, I think it's a great thing. And hopefully you have the potential to do that for us, and people across the country will continue to allow people that have served us to still have an impact.
Yeah, I appreciate teeing up that everything you just teed up there.
Yeah, I know it's a lot to unpack, but
I think the beautiful thing about veterans, we've served both Republican and Democrat presidents. While I was in uniform, I did not vote in presidential elections, with one exception, and I'll tell you what that is in a second. I did not vote because I did not believe, while I was serving in uniform, I ought to be picking my commander-in-chief. Not everybody believes that, but that was a common thought back in the times of when Eisenhower was a general. They did not vote either in presidential elections. I did vote in one during that period of time, and that was Bush and Al Gore. And I thought Al Gore was as phony as a $3 bill, and I thought George Bush the son was genuine. So I voted in that.
You know what's funny, if I can touch on that, you talk about George Bush. I had an opportunity to actually be at an event, a kind of an intimate event where he spoke down in Texas. This is long after he was president. And I had mixed feelings about Bush as our president, because I obviously during 2001 and when that's when the attack obviously on our country happened, I was in high school, and so Bush caught a lot of negative press, good press, negative press, and when you're young and you're trying to figure it out, you don't necessarily have all the kind of the answers. But when I met him, to your point, he was a very captivating person. And I said to my wife at the time, I said, I can see now why he was elected president. A lot of his we'll call them gaffes. We got a president makes a lot of gaffes now, but a lot of things that George Bush, Jr., W, I should say, a lot of the things that he used to get crucified for a little bit in the media, and maybe some of them are rightfully so. But I will tell you, to meet that guy in person and to listen to him speak, I understood why so many people supported him to be president. And I think that, I don't know if he was a good or a great or a bad president, but I just can see as a person where he did feel genuine. Your point was he seemed genuine. I got to say, when I met him, he did seem like a really genuine guy, which was interesting.
And I think history will be kind to him. Let me tell you about his father. His father was probably the most qualified person we've had sit in that office from his background prior to becoming the president. But he kind of came across a little stiff, right?
He didn't have the personality, right?
Yeah, he came across stiff. Well, 2 years after he was defeated by President Clinton, he came to Quantico, Virginia. I was a captain teaching, and we're sitting around one morning. There's 10 of us captains, and we're teaching young lieutenants, probably about 50 in the class, infantry tactics. We were teaching them how to become infantry officers, which is what I was. And we get a phone call. President Bush had spoken to the FBI Academy the night before, and he wanted to come out to where I was teaching, and he wanted to come visit with the 10 of us and our 40 to 50 lieutenants. And I thought, okay, this is awesome. He's going to come meet with us for half an hour, say hello. He showed up at about 8 o'clock in the morning. He didn't go home until 5 o'clock at night. Wow. Spent the entire day with us, middle of the winter time, and we were out doing a live fire that day. So We're taking lieutenants. It's the middle of the winter time. It's freezing. And he's driving around in the back of our Amtraks. He's got his flak jacket on, his helmet on. He's driving through the woods with us in the back of this thing, bouncing around like the rest of us. And then after the end of the day, we're all in the bleachers, and he talks to us. And you saw the real man,
right?
Not the guy you saw on TV. And had he been as personable
in public
that he was with us that day, he would have won that election in '92.
And you know, that's an interesting point too, because part of the reason we developed this particular podcast, The Best Is Yet to Come, that we talk about, is to do that, is to take people like yourself who have now gained a little bit of notoriety in the public eye, obviously running for office. And that's what happens is the public eye sometimes is misconstrued based on a lot of things, whether it be the media or I guess mostly the media, right? But in today's world, we have social media and so many different things happen. And a lot of times I think the actual person doesn't shine through, because, you know, someone who knows you and knows who Gerry is and maybe grew up with Gerry, they have a different, obviously, maybe an opinion or a feeling of you than someone, you know, and not every time can we control the narrative that the media has. So when we developed this, we did this for the simple fact to do what we're doing here, is for someone to have the ability to genuinely have a conversation with someone like yourself, Gerry Leonard, who may not have that opportunity. I mean, you're at a ton of events. I've seen you all over the place. And so I know you're out there with amongst the people, and you're getting kind of the word out there and getting your brand of politics to be known. But to have an opportunity to do this, I think, is very important. And I think elected officials, some of them avoid that because of it could have a detriment to them, right? Because maybe their public perception, maybe the media is kind to them, and other ones the media is not so kind to. But in your case, you know, we've talked a little bit about this when we first met. And you have an interesting story about your brand of politics and how throughout your life you've gotten to where you are. And I think it's important that someone like you with your mindset has an opportunity to do what you're doing, because the one thing that I took from you on our first meeting was you were an American. It wasn't about party. It wasn't, and I believe, if I have it correctly, your tagline is principles over politics. That's correct, right?
Absolutely.
So we spoke about it, and you grew up in Rhode Island, which obviously is quite a blue state, right? It's a heavily Democratic state, as we know. And your formative years, you were of the Democratic mindset, right? You would consider yourself a kind of a Democrat supporter.
A JFK Democrat.
Okay, so yep, I would, and I think my grandfather would have fell in that same line. You know, when he used to obviously have an affinity for JFK, but he was also a Reagan voter. So he was a JFK Democrat, he was a Reagan Democrat, and I think that if you look at JFK and Reagan, they had a lot of similarities. But then you talked about when you traveled through the military and started to grow and started to see things differently, you became a little bit more, you felt the Democratic Party wasn't for you, and you became a little more back to that American concept. So elaborate on that a little bit for me, how you end up here with the philosophies that you have.
Yeah, that's, I appreciate the question. So yes, I grew up in a Democrat household. My father served on the North Kingstown School Committee as an elected official Democrat. My mother was on the North Kingstown Planning Board, appointed Democrat. So yes, that's the background I came from. Grandparents were JFK Democrats. Picture John F. Kennedy was on the wall in my grandmother's living room. So that's how I grew up, and I couldn't wait to vote when I was 18 years old. At the time, my father was laid off during some of the Reagan cuts. Ronald Reagan was probably a four-letter word in the House, and I went to the voting booth and I voted for the other candidate, which was Walter Mondale. That may not play well in Republican circles, but that's the way I was raised, and that's what the consensus was in the House. And then I go off and I join the service, and while I was traveling abroad, and you start to see other nations and how they operate across the globe, you start realizing how fortunate every single one of us is to be born in this country, to immigrate to this country and become U.S. citizens. We are a melting pot. You go to other countries, it's if you're not Chinese in China, It's too bad, so sad.
Right.
If you're not French in France, too bad, so sad. In this country, it doesn't matter where you came from. And what binds us together is our common culture, it's common language, it's our historical documents that have set quite frankly, they built the foundation for what I believe is the greatest country that this world's ever seen. And while I was in the service learning that, and it wasn't from the Marine Corps, it was just traveling the globe, I shifted to the right. Either the Democrat Party shifted too far left from me, but I shifted to the right. And I'll tell you, the one other thing, it was in the 90s, a friend of mine said, you ought to read this book. And the book was written by Arthur Schlesinger, who worked for the Kennedy administration. And maybe he had a transformation himself politically later in life, but the book he wrote was called The Disuniting of America. And basically he was laying out the Democrat playbook for controlling power in the United States.
Right.
And it was basically to break us up into little tribes. And to me, there's nothing more un-American than that. It doesn't matter what color, creed, sex we are. At the end of the day, we're Americans.
Right. And, I so appreciate that and the fact that we've had that conversation, because I too agree with you and feel that way. And I think the majority of the country feels that way. And it's so sad that the media has created these divisions. And going back to the beginning of our conversation, George Washington, he said that he believed about one party. It was the American party. It was the American people. And we, our documents talk about how that's everybody. I think every true American always believes in freedom for all. Every man, woman, and child that's an American deserves, not only frankly deserves, they have without question the inalienable rights that are written in our documents. And I feel that in today's society, so much of that is missed. And again, I want to reiterate that I appreciate your approach to this, because you're a kind of a transcending candidate right now, where in a state where there's very limited options of someone who actually, let me see if I don't want to insult anybody, but someone who has a common sense approach, but also has the thread of America, that thread that holds us together, that unites people. You seem like a guy who could do that, especially on the other side when some people are so polarizing or so divisive. Where every time I've been in your presence and every time I've seen you speaking to people, I've noticed that you speak to all people, and you're very clear about your convictions, and you've never yet, since I've been around you, towed a party line, which I think is amazing given today's political climate. And so hopefully you have the opportunity to continue to get your message out there to the state of Rhode Island, because I think someone with your approach, background, and philosophies would be such a great representation for us and really have the ability to unify us and get our state back to a place. And I think I'm going to let you say what you said last time that I heard you speak, but get our state back to that place where we belong. And I want to let you go ahead and tell me what what your thoughts are. I think last night you had some very good, profound.
Refresh me.
So when we were at the fundraiser last night, you talked about where the state has been headed for the last 70 years, and the one-party rule, and how it's been so one-sided, and that most of the state has actually it's been a disservice because they haven't been represented by someone who's looking out for the community's best interest, but also with an American concept, not about a party of Democrat or Republican, but about a party of how do we, school systems are broken in this country. The financial system is broken in this country. In some cases, the love of this country is being diminished because of what I'll call bad policy, bad politics. And that was something that struck a chord with you and that you were very passionate about last night.
Yeah, so I'm very passionate about the way Rhode Island's been governed. And it's been a one-party ruled state for 70 years. And that's not what our founding fathers wanted. They wanted friction. They didn't anticipate the emergence of political parties, but they wanted friction in our political dialogue. They didn't expect our system to work super fast and smooth, right. But from that friction better policies, better solutions that work for everybody. And I think there's a for too long in the state of Rhode Island, there's been a I don't know if it's a silent majority, but a silenced group, a population that's been silenced.
Right.
And I think that's working families in the state of Rhode Island. I think it's middle-class families. And I think, quite frankly, with the national policies today and some of the things that happen within the state, I think sometimes the working families and the middle-class families, which are the backbone of the country.
Right. Which are the majority, no question.
Which they could be better served.
Right.
We all could be better served.
You know, it's funny because you hear from, if you watch television or kind of spend time on social media, there's people that would have you believe that this country is more divided now than it's ever been. And I completely disagree, because I think if you took the TV and you shut it off and you went and talked to your neighbor, I tell people, just talk to your neighbor. Forget what they tell you on the television, but talk to your neighbor. I don't think this country is that far off, meaning the masses of people, us, the everyday citizen. I don't think we're that. Listen, nobody wants their children to be put in any awkward or uncomfortable positions.
Absolutely right.
And, you know, there's obviously a facet of things like that going on. Nobody wants their streets to not be safe. Nobody wants their water to not be clean and their air to not be, you know, we can go on and on about all these major topics. But that all being said, nobody wants an extreme answer for anything. And we only have fed extreme answers. Now, they sit there and tell you this country's more divided. And I say I disagree, because there was a time in this country there was war in the streets. There was a civil war, right? And so I'm not saying, and I'm not naive enough to think that at some point that could never be a possibility. Some people think that's so far long ago. It was not that long ago. It was 1860. If you really think about it, I mean, 100 and something years, it's not that long ago. However, I think if you went and polled or you spoke to the everyday person, and again, people like you and I, we pay attention to the political scene a little more, so we have different views. But if you just went to the everyday guy, you know, who's out there digging in a ditch, and you know, because you have a great background, obviously being in the construction industry for a lot of time. But if you talk about that everyday person we're talking about, those people that are, you know, running businesses, and we're out here, we're working, and we're paying the taxes and doing all that stuff, I have conversations with these people that identify as Democrat, that identify as a Republican. But at the end of the day, they're not that far off. And I think that's the unique part, is that you've been a consistent voice who's not that far off. You're pretty much, you know, kind of smack dab where I think most people feel.
And I'd like to say that. I think at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want to make sure that the America we leave for our grandkids and great-grandkids is the one we inherited from our forefathers. And we want a better future for our children. We all want the same thing. Okay. And I think right now, I do think it's divisive. You give me hope that we're not, and I agree with you. So what I think this country is it's a big bell curve. And we've got this extreme on both sides of the political spectrum that unfortunately are driving a lot of the dialogue that I think gets divisive. Most of us operate somewhere, could be a little bit on the right, could be on the left, but we operate where that bell curve is, the peak of it. You know, I so much agree with you. Get out of the house, turn off the TV, get out of the house, talk to your neighbor. Right. It'll go a long way. And let's put the word civil back in front of our discourse. I'm
into that. So I also want to touch on a couple little things here as we're going to get nearing the end of this. And again, thank you so much for doing this. It's been really great to get to know you. And getting to know you, so you know, you're a family guy, right? You got a whole bunch of kids, I think, right?
I got 4.
You got 4 kids, 4 children.
4 kids. And proud of every single one of them.
Excellent. Now it's I've met your son. I had an opportunity to meet your son, and you have 3 daughters as well, right?
I do.
And they kind of travel across the country or live in different areas in the country?
They do. My daughter, one daughter's a nurse. She lives in Rhode Island, but does travel in nursing. My second daughter lives in Europe. Oh, wow. She's getting her PhD in epidemiology. She also she served 2 years in the Peace Corps after she came out of undergraduate school in Rwanda, which was amazing. And my youngest daughter lives down in New York City. She's an architect, and she's looking to go to Europe too. They all want to go to Europe. Yeah. My son's actually leaving for Europe for 10 days here in the future. Excellent. And according to him, he's going to, after this campaign finishes, after November 7th, he's going to be going to Australia for a year. So, you know, that may have been a product of 30 years in the Marine Corps, moving around quite a bit.
Yeah, sure.
So a sense of adventure.
That's great.
So yeah, it's proud of every one of them.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to also ask you now, obviously we spoke a lot about your history, your background, and we touched upon a little bit of the politics. What's one thing that people would be shocked to know or surprised to know about Gerry Leonard? Maybe even some of the people who are close to you that maybe not know, something. If you were going to tell somebody, what's the one thing people would be surprised to know about you? I know that's a loaded question.
No,
could be anything. A hidden talent.
No, I don't have many hidden talents. I can't sing. I can't dance. I've been told that on a number of occasions. No, I like romantic movies, and I sometimes will tear up a little bit in the movie theater.
All right.
And my favorite movie, and I try to watch it as often as I can with my 3 daughters, is The Princess Bride.
Oh wow!
It's my favorite movie. It's funny. It's romantic.
Who would have thought a guy like you, a Marine like that, is going to tear up? That's great.
Yeah.
That's something I think no one would ever expect. That's a good answer. I like that.
Okay.
That's excellent. Now, you're going through this process, and I know it's grueling. It's taxing, and there's a lot of hours, a lot of days. What is the one thing that surprised you the most about running for office? Something that you didn't expect, because you have an expectation. You obviously spend a little time in politics, and you have a thought about, okay, what's going to be. What's the one thing that you could say surprised you the most that you had no anticipation of, but it shocked you?
How many folks out there are passionate of the state of Rhode Island, the future of Rhode Island, our country, and the future of our country? And going back to something you said earlier, that gives me hope. I do think that our brightest days as a country are in front of us. We do need to learn to row together, work together, and remember that the country that our forefathers, the founding fathers, created for us is a gift worth fighting for.
Well, amen to that, and I'll leave it with this. We named this podcast "The Best Is Yet to Come," and that's something that has resonated. And I think you just hit the nail on the head and said it in a way that has been said before many times. I still believe that America's brightest days are still ahead. As crazy as the world is right now, and as much as it seems that it's kind of doom and gloom, for some reason I just have this optimistic outlook that at some point this too shall pass and we will overcome. And I appreciate you. I appreciate the fact that you're running for office, because that's not easy. All right, you got to respect anyone that does it on all sides. It's not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of sacrifice being made, and I want to say that we wish you the best. We're looking forward to see what it has to come. I'd like to give you an opportunity, if you would. You can face the camera and give a few words to the people that are watching this. Speak directly to those people, because I had a great time speaking directly with you. And
which camera, over here?
Yeah, go ahead, right there.
To all the voters of Rhode Island, to all the citizens of Rhode Island, the 7th of November is fast approaching. I think we're about 40 days out. I'd ask you to take a look at my website. I will be out in every town at every event that I can find. Please let us know if there's events in your town you'd like us to be at. But I believe that this election is not about you and I. It's about our grandkids and our great-grandkids, and it's what type of nation and what type of state we're leaving for them. So thank you, and I ask for your vote on the 7th of November, or when the early voting starts, and I can't recall what that date is. But
it's coming up in October, right?
Yeah, it's about the 16th or 18th of October, so right around the corner. So I ask for your vote, and I think it makes personally a ton of sense to balance our federal delegation out with a Republican, particularly when you have a House right now that's controlled by the Republican Party. I think it'll benefit Rhode Island greatly.
Excellent. All right, everyone, we want to thank you again. The Best Is Yet to Come podcast. We got a lot more great shows coming up. We want to thank Gerry again for being here. I want to give a shout out to my man Will, who's always on the on the producing side of things, and we'll look to see you all soon. Gerry, thank you so much.
Brother.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks.